I think the first one and the thing that grounds me as a leader is just understanding my value system, knowing what it is. For me, it's integrity, transparency, and accountability. And it just grounding yourself in that, I think it makes you seem like a more reliable leader, makes you seem more trustworthy.
Welcome to Tech Teams Today. Our guest today is Ryan Mitchell, VP of Network Products and Service Engineering at WOW Internet Cable and Phone. Ryan has spent nearly 2 decades leading large-scale network transformations, building high-performing engineering teams, and aligning technology with business outcomes. In this episode, we'll dive into leadership lessons, the evolution of network platforms, and what it takes to deliver customer-first innovation at scale. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Go easy on me as it's my first podcast, so looking forward to it.
Will do. So you've been at WOW for more than 18 years, growing from hands-on engineering roles into senior technology leadership. What's kept you at one company for that long in an industry known for constant churn and change?
There's a lot of factors here, and for what it's worth, I think I was at a startup for 7-ish years before joining WOW. And that startup was absorbed into WOW. So if you combine the two together, I've actually been here closer to 25 years. So quite a long time in technology. But, I think it's being with an organization where there's opportunities to grow because the organization's trying new things, the organization's changing, et cetera. I like to switch roles every so often, 3 to 5 years. I've gone as long as 7 in some cases, but making sure that the organization provides opportunities to do that, right? If I look at where I started to where I've come, I started in what we call a network operations center in our industry, which you're kind of monitoring services, tier 1, break fix, those sorts of things. Moving into more of engineering roles, at the time, business services, unified communications, those sorts of things. Moving into leadership roles, advancing those leadership positions within the organization. And I've been able to do that every 3 to 5 years because I've been with a company that has had presented the opportunity to do that, right? I like to look inward for new opportunities before looking outward. And I'm not going to sit here and say I've never looked outward in my 25-year tenure here, but there's the internal opportunities have always been better, in my opinion, and in my case, than some of the external ones that were available at the time. So, and location, I don't want to undermine or undervalue location, and location is certainly a factor. I mean, I'm in Southern Indiana, which is not the technology center of the universe. So, being at an organization or being able to do what I do, and living in a place where, I have family, friends, et cetera, is nice. So.
Yeah. So you haven't had to move around in that time period, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So looking back at, I don't know if I should say 18 or 25 years, but what's one leadership principle that stayed consistent across your career and maybe one that you would rethink entirely?
I think the first one and the thing that grounds me as a leader is just understanding my value system, right? Knowing what it is. For me, it's integrity, transparency, and accountability. And it just grounding yourself in that. I think it makes you seem like a more reliable leader, makes you seem more trustworthy. In some ways, you're somewhat predictable to your peers and, folks you're supporting. It doesn't mean it's never going to change. New things come up, new technologies, new ways of looking at things, new compliance things, new laws, et cetera, come about. So certainly you have to change your values occasionally, but generally you should ground yourself in a set of values and stay consistent over time, right? I think when you're looking at, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. Continue.
Yeah. When I think about the things I would rethink, coming up through the ranks as an engineer, I think letting your work speak for itself is something that, I've always believed in. I still believe in at my core. I delivered this thing, I delivered it on time, on budget, whatever. We exceeded expectations, those sorts of things. Let that speak for itself. And in many ways it should. However, I think as an engineer early in my career, I thought that's all I had to do. I did good work. I get rewarded for it. And I think, learning how to sell myself better, learning how to sell the team, its capabilities, etc. It's something I still struggle with. It's just not part of who I am as a person, my personality, etc. But certainly something I think I have to work on, and others in leadership roles have to work on as well, because doing good work is the core of why you do what you do. However, being able to tell folks the work you're doing, explain why you'd be a good fit or your team would be a good fit for this new project, this new opportunity, what have you, are certainly skills that leaders need to have as well.
And I think that goes doubly for engineering leaders, where usually, historically speaking, the work just spoke for itself and you didn't really have to sell yourself or your team, right? And now, especially in the past 5 years, 3 years, I would say, that's becoming increasingly more important for engineering leaders. So moving on, you've led teams through M&A integrations, major tech shifts, massive growth. What's sort of the hardest change initiative you've had to drive, and how did you bring the teams along?
I think one of the hardest ones, and there's several, but probably the one that comes to mind is, being with the same company for so long. There's been points in time where we were doing a lot of M&A. We'd buy systems to grow the company. There's been times when we've done divestitures. We would divest systems to free up capital to go do other things, right? But I think the hardest was we basically doubled the company in size overnight. So we merged with another organization, and I think the cultures of the two organizations were somewhat different. We had kind of a customer first, I'll say more northern culture. And the company we merged with was, not to say they weren't customer first, but they were more of a southern culture, did things a different way. And, I think it was hard just because the cultures didn't necessarily align initially. So we had to kind of navigate that. Being a young leader, a young director at the time, I didn't understand the importance of decisiveness. So there's a time for listening, as there always is, and there's a time for making decisions, and it's not always easy to navigate those things, coupled with the fact that you're navigating this new culture that, you're trying to figure out how to operate in and those sorts of things. So ultimately, I think time and patience is how we brought the teams along, right? Like, this is our value system. This is what we need to do. This is why we're doing it, establishing a good cadence for allowing engineers to see the value in what we're doing, the business value, et cetera. So, that was tough. And I think there's lots of use cases out there that show that, acquisitions at that scale typically fail because you don't have the internal processes, procedures, cultures, et cetera, to basically double its size overnight. But I think ultimately the organization came out the other end of it okay. So not to say we didn't make mistakes, but we're certainly better for it now. So
yeah, and I also imagine a fair bit of compromise needs to be involved in that to be successful, right?
Absolutely, 100%.
So talking about building teams and culture, you emphasize emotional intelligence and staff motivation in your leadership style. What does that look like in practice, and especially when leading hybrid and remote teams?
Sure. I don't know if they're as relevant. I think it's just team leading in general, whether you're in person, whether you're remote. I don't know that matters as much for how you motivate, and how you conduct yourself on a daily basis. But, certainly emotional intelligence is important to me, just because I believe, that reaction should be based on data, fact. They should be kind of intellectual and not as emotional. So just making sure I kind of maintain a level of emotional intelligence in my day-to-day operation as part of the business, et cetera, I think is key. And it goes back to that reliability thing, right? Transparency, accountability, and integrity. being reliable, not being flying off the handle, those sorts of things, right? It engenders trust with teams, etc. Um, Kind of getting into motivation, right? Finding what intrinsically motivates an individual is always key, and it's tough because everybody's motivated differently. The really good engineers, the really good folks are motivated by opportunity, right? I get the opportunity to go do this project, to learn this new thing, to get my hands on this, whatever. And frankly, those people are a little easier to motivate than folks who are motivated by, salary, et cetera. Not that there's anything wrong with that. We're all here for a reason, but, really trying to learn people and what intrinsically motivates them, I've found is kind of the best way to motivate people. As it relates to hybrid and remote teams, I think the finding that intrinsic motivation is just harder to do because it's harder to build rapport with a person virtually, right? Certainly, you can do it with one-on-ones and things like that, but it's certainly more challenging to do that in a virtual world than it is to like go have a beer with somebody after work or whatever, right? So I think when organizations allow you to do that, getting out in front of people is still important, even if you don't get to do it every day. But ultimately it comes back to what motivates an individual, learning that, providing the opportunities where you can for them to succeed and grow, right?
And on your team, do you manage a hybrid team? What does the split sort of look like between remote and on-site?
So pre-pandemic, we were hybrid, just kind of in the way the organization operated. I think we had our corporate offices in Denver, but we had, let's call it corporate resources engineers, technical folks across 6 markets throughout the U.S. So even though we weren't remote working at home, we were remote in that, the people we needed to interact with weren't always available in the same building we were at, right? Where we are now is, we call it hybrid, but it's almost entirely remote. So, certainly we can get out as leaders a couple times a year, try to do that, see people when I can, but we're entirely remote at this point in time. So.
And you said earlier you kind of didn't see that much of a difference in how you led, which is an unusual answer. The biggest thing I've heard is sort of that I guess would connect to that is treat engineers, whether they're in office or remote, the same, and you'll get the best results. And you don't do anything in office that your remote devs can't participate in, right?
No, absolutely. 100% agree with that in terms of the remote thing. Everybody has to be on equal playing field. I've always believed that. And certainly that's something that's practiced as well. It's easier to do when everybody's remote because everybody's treated the same, but I had to put a little more focus on it when, we had folks spread across 6 different offices, right? So.
Yeah. And then also all your remote people. So you've transformed teams from waterfall to agile, and you're a big proponent of agile. I'm curious what you learned from overcoming probably some resistance to that process change.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot internally. I could probably talk about this topic for hours, honestly. But, I think what I've learned over time is, because I kind of was brought up in not agile, waterfall-based project management. I started embracing agile in the late 20 teens, and through practicing it, et cetera, I've kind of learned that they're both a means to an end. You're managing a project, you have an outcome that you're trying to achieve. You're trying to achieve it under a certain budget, within a certain time frame, et cetera. The core difference, and the agile purists, mad at me when I talk like this, but the core difference between the two, in my opinion, is agile is more transparent and agile has iterative delivery, right? So if I have some value I can deliver now, I'll deliver it now instead of waiting until the next milestone event before I do it, right? So, an epic is a milestone is an epic. They kind of serve the same purpose within those two frameworks, right? I think the challenge is when you're bringing teams along on that journey, initially, I think teams feel sometimes micromanaged, right? There's, again, the element of transparency, your daily stand-up every day. What did you get done yesterday? What are you going to do today? What impediments do you have? What blockers can we help with, et cetera? That dialogue's ongoing. It happens every day. Waterfall, hey, when are you going to get this done? I'm going to get it done in 2 weeks. Great. We'll talk again in 2 weeks. So it feels a little bit more autonomous, and that there's a little bit more autonomy, I think, for some folks. But I think that's one of the bigger hurdles that I've had to overcome on multiple occasions in trying to implement Agile within a team is, why are you micromanaging me? Well, we're not. It's transparency. We're going to give you this framework to work within. You're actually going to have more ability to make decisions, et cetera. You just have to communicate up more, so to speak, right? So I think that's the biggest challenge I see. Over time, bringing people along, they start to see the value, they start to get it, it starts to click, and I think you can kind of see that moment when the light bulb comes off. You're like, okay, yeah, we're going to be okay now. We're moving forward, right? So,
yeah, once everyone starts to get it and everyone gets on the same page, it's not fully. I don't think you're fully agile until everybody on the team is sort of on the same page. So this one's interesting. So you created a data science and engineering organization inside a network company. I'm curious what sparked that move and how has it changed how you operate?
Yeah, I think at the time, we wanted to become more data-driven in our decision-making. And as a network operator, we were starting to do some things that help us get there. I mean, everything is about the network telemetry, metrics, traces, logs, et cetera, how you aggregate that, how you make decisions on it, how you correlate that, et cetera. I think our initial journey there was a bit rocky, to be honest. We're like, we're gonna bring in a data scientist, literally a single data scientist, and they're gonna help us do this, right? And we started to do some analysis. We started to take on some projects, and what we found is that our data wasn't really good enough to do what we wanted to do with it, right? We could certainly do churn analysis, demographic analysis, apply some statistical models to that, but really getting into what we were trying to do with our network telemetry and, doing some predicted churn analysis, et cetera, we kind of struggled with. So for a lot of that time, we've been focused on data engineering. How do we improve our data? How to, we leverage all that data coming from our network so that we can, drive decision-making. How do we utilize that data to be proactive? Can we proactively fix a customer's issue before they know they have it? Can we fix a problem in a neighborhood before it impacts multiple customers? Can we reduce our time to repair? Those sorts of things, I think, is where we've been using that data to drive our business. And it's a journey. We're still on it. We still have a lot to do there. But over the last 4 to 5 years, we have been able to make an impact, mostly through data engineering and somewhat through data science. So,
yeah, it's definitely a good point about there's only so much you can do with data science and data engineering if your data isn't solid, right?
Right. Yep.
So it's like step one is like, is our data solid, and what do we need to do to clean that up?
Yep.
So telecom and networking are often sort of looked at as utility or utility-like, but you push sort of CI/CD and DevOps into that culture. And I'm curious how you balance reliability and the speed of innovation, considering that.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a funny secret or a dirty secret in our industry, but, telecommunications companies, whether cable or telecom or whatever, aren't really known for innovation, right? I mean, we've learned how to market the same product in multiple ways for multiple purposes for years, right? So, not to say we don't innovate, but we're not a startup software company. We're not an AI organization. We're not pushing new features 5, 10, 20, 30 times a day, right? So for us, the push to go to DevOps and CI/CD was more around the efficiencies of the change management process, right? As we've been trying to evolve our culture into be more of a technology-focused culture from just a cable company in air quotes or what have you, we had to adopt a framework that allowed us to have some discipline to make sure that, the testing processes that we're doing in our lower environments are the same, or allow us to have a quality process and a quality product going into our upper environments or production systems, right? So for us, that journey has been really more around the reliability and the predictability and the discipline of the change management process, more than it is the continuous deployment, because we're not doing a lot of continuous deployment, but we are putting frameworks in place that allow us to have that discipline. And certainly if the organization wants to go faster, we would be able to do that, right? So.
And something else I want to talk about is hybrid cloud. So hybrid cloud seems to, I would say 5 years ago, I wouldn't have said hybrid cloud would ever come back in a major way. But I feel like LLMs have definitely played a large role in that. So with hybrid cloud sort of coming back in a lot of areas, as more end teams are building on-prem components for mostly security and compliance reasons, in some cases cost reasons, and you've had to implement it with real CapEx and OpEx trade-offs. What lessons would you share with other engineering leaders sort of wrestling with those same decisions?
Yeah, for sure. And just to kind of frame it up a little bit, as an ISP, we do have some data centers, but we have a lot of data center-like infrastructure as well. We call them head ends and cable. They call them central offices and telecom, where we can put compute. So we're paying wholesale power. We've got plenty of rack space. We've got plenty of air conditioning. We have all of the core components to build infrastructure, right? Now, it still requires people, and it still requires maintenance, and it still requires all those things. But unlike other industries who may not have facilities readily available, who have to pay markups on power and call the smart hands people and pay all those fees, et cetera, we don't have that. So for us, the hybrid cloud journey is about managing costs and managing functionality and innovation, and kind of navigating that environment, right? So FinOps is certainly something that I think is key for us. It's not to say we have a FinOps team, but, having some tools in place that gives you the insights where, this workload is underutilized. Maybe you should downgrade it, or, hey, this data is being stored over here, but it's hardly being written or wrote to, can you put that in a different location, et cetera. So FinOps is certainly a key for us. And like going back to the private cloud isn't as expensive for us as it might be for people in other industries, right? That being said, security is everything. There's security and compliance use cases where, we want to make sure we maintain security, we maintain compliance. A lot of our compliance processes also are very costly, right? Especially when you get into all the network telemetry, like if we have to keep it for a specific compliance use case for multiple years, I mean, that's a lot of data to store that you're probably not going to access often, right? So I think the other component for us is making sure we build our infrastructure to be a private cloud, right? And what that allows us to do is, again, through those DevOps processes, we can shift our workloads across multiple hyperscalers. We can shift it across multiple private clouds, which unfortunately we have today. So we can take those workloads, we can say this workload would be optimized over here, it would be optimized over there, what have you. So I think that's also key for us in terms of navigating that journey. And I think we're still on it. We're not doing everything as well as we'd like there, but as we continue to improve, certainly that's the vision, that any workload, anywhere, anytime. And really, we want to take the onus off the developers as well. We want the infrastructure to be agnostic to the developer. They need to focus on, this is my app, the app I'm going to write. This is my network, my system, my what have you. It's going to run in the organization's infrastructure, no matter where it runs. And then, we have the ability to shift it around as demand needs or compliance changes or security changes or what have you, right? So.
And do you have like a preferred cloud provider, or do you have the ability to sort of deploy to different clouds like AWS or GCP, Azure?
Today we're primarily an AWS shop. You know, I suspect we'll always have AWS in the mix, but as like others, we're always open to other hyperscalers as well, right? So,
Interesting. So I'm curious, talking a little bit about the future, actually the present probably, and the future. So when hiring engineers today, or looking at potential engineers, whether you're hiring them on board to begin with or moving them up through the organization, there seems to be a pretty big shift now, especially in the junior level, between developers that started learning how to code with these sort of AI co-pilots versus the generation that learned how to code way before that, and sort of the difference in engineering skills, fundamental knowledge, sort of approach to problem solving and things like that. I'm curious if you've noticed any kind of difference in what it's like to sort of either upskill, hire, mentor these junior developers that are coming up today.
yeah, for sure. I think with my tenure at the organization is not uncommon. We have other engineers who've been here for 10, 15 years, 7 years, 5 years, what have you. So for us, it's certainly something we ask for when we're hiring, but it's also bringing people up into new ways of thinking, really in terms of how to be more efficient, right? So, and for some, that's not a challenge. Like this new technology came out, they wanted to learn it. They've got every commercial LLM on the market installed on their computer, and they switch back and forth, and it's great. They're very efficient, very productive. Others, you got to kind of bring them along. It's, well, I've always done it this way. I already know how to do this. I don't need help, what have you, right? So I think it's something we're wrestling with now and trying to build a culture where, we use AI, it makes us more efficient, etc. I don't think, we want to, take all the knowledge out of the human, because I think AI still make mistakes. We need to make sure that we have folks who, I think this is getting into your more mid to senior level engineer where, yeah, that's not really how this works. So I'm going to take your guidance and I'm going to change it a little bit and, put it in this system, this application, this network, what have you, right? So I'll say we're wrestling with it now. I don't think we have all the answers there, but certainly it's a requirement for bringing people in, and certainly it's a requirement for continuous development with our existing staff. So,
Do you guys have any like AI mandates, like all developers need to use X, Y, or Z editor, IDE, or anything like that?
Not yet. I think we're talking about it. I think we want to have, because currently, full transparency, like we don't allow, I'm going to say allow, we don't allow developers or employees to connect AIs to our internal data, right? So it's, I need to know how to write this Python script to do whatever, or I need to know this network config in an Arista router, or I need to know whatever for this firewall, things like that, right? And you're kind of getting that generic information off the net. So as we look at how we're navigating that, deciding on a single AI will allow us to then start, applying security policy and integrating that into our corporate ecosystem, right? So I think that those are the conversations we're having today.
Interesting. I could see, have you guys ever thought about, and you don't have to answer this, but I've heard it from a few engineering leaders, of sort of just building like an on-prem LLM so that you're not exposing sensitive data to public LLMs?
I think we're discussing a lot of things right now. For us, the build versus buy conversation is real. I mean, we're a mid-tier operator. We don't have the budgets of some of our competitors. We don't have the budgets of Silicon Valley. So, whether we invest in building our own or not, it's debatable. I think we'll absolutely leverage some of the services from the hyperscalers at some point, where you have access to pick your favorite LLM for this process or that process. But whether we build an overarching AI for the business is something I don't think we've decided yet. So,
fair answer. So talking about to future, just to wrap up the episode. So this is sort of a rapid fire round, but feel free to take as long as you want to answer these questions. So where do you see the biggest opportunities for network and platform innovation in the next 5 years?
I think we were just on the AI conversation. I think AI is going to continue to be the biggest opportunity in the telecom ISP space, talking about autonomous networks and those sorts of things, which in other words, is self-healing. Again, taking all that telemetry data, taking all the geographic data, et cetera, being able to determine when a customer has a problem and being able to automatically fix it and or dispatch somebody quickly who can fix it. I think continuing to double down on those use cases is going to be where the biggest opportunity is for our industry.
Yeah, so I guess that kind of answered my next question, but that's fine. What advice would you give to engineers who want to move into leadership roles, especially in like an infrastructure-heavy industry like telecom?
Right. I think the decision to move into a leadership role or not is an individual one. And I don't know that it's industry specific, but the areas where I would coach people were, first decide that you want to do this, right? I mean, once you make that decision to go into leadership, I mean, when you're in a frontline leader, maybe lower middle management, you can certainly go back. You can go back to being a coder. You could go back to being a network engineer. You can get hands on keyboard again. At some point in your leadership trajectory, like you're not going to be able to do that anymore. You're going to lose the skill. You're going to lose the habit, so to speak. Not to say you couldn't pick it back up, but it's not quite like riding a bike, right? So, ask yourself, do I want to lead people? Am I good at that? Am I good at driving the business forward? Those sorts of questions, as opposed to, well, I'd like to make more money and I think I want to be in leadership for that reason, because I see that a lot, right? So,
right. And some people just want to build cool stuff, and
yeah,
and that's fine. And, I think there's like this intrinsic, well, I'm supposed to move up. That's what we're supposed to do is I did my time as an engineer. Now I'm supposed to be an engineering leader, where that might not be where you're the happiest, whereas for some people, they put in their time as an engineer, move on to engineering leadership, find their comfort zone there. So yeah, I agree. It definitely is, it's different for everybody, and it's also different based on where you are in your career.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So yeah, it's critical to first decide that's what you want to do. And I mean, when you larger organizations, usually the technology track is a little broader. You can move your way up through engineering ranks. You can get into some sort of architecture role. But even as an architect, you're starting to use leadership skills, right? I mean, you may or may not be hands-on keyboard as often as you were when you're maybe a principal engineer, for example. So, just deciding what you want to do and how you like to spend your time at work, I think is critical there. When you get into leadership, there's a lot of sociological and psychological philosophies that you're applying. You have to learn to listen intently and deliberately. I know there's a lot of leaders who don't do that, but trying to understand where somebody's coming from is key. You have to listen again and listen to be able to guide people to their own conclusions. You have to learn when you're going to be the leader and when you're going to be the manager. I know a lot of people don't really talk about that because it's all leader, inspirational, et cetera. But sometimes it's required. You have to make a decision and you have to force an action, right? So, being able to wear both of those hats, I think, is critical. I know the leader hat's more fun to wear, but sometimes you have to put the manager hat on too, right? And finally, I think you have to give yourself grace. You're going to have to make tough decisions sometimes about that's going to impact a project or a team or what have you. Learn to take care of yourself so that you can then take care of others. Give yourself grace, be easy on yourself, and make sure that you're always in a state, both physically and mentally, that you can show up for others and you can support others, because that's your role. You're making other people successful, right? I mean, and your ability to do that's what drives the business forward. So
final question. What what's sort of a contrarian philosophy that you may have on engineering leadership that isn't commonplace among engineering leaders?
That is a good question.
I feel like you dropped a few, so I think you might have a solid few options here.
Yeah, for sure. I guess I'll play on the manager hat a little more, being contrarian, you know, kind of just digging into that a little more. I think, and the way I like to run teams is, there's a time for ideation, there's a time for inspiration. We're at the very beginning of a thing. We got to figure out how this widget's going to work, what technologies we're going to bring to bear, what languages we're going to use, what the flow of information is going to be with the systems. You have to figure all that out. It's very exciting. At some point before or after that, you're going to have to sell that to the business, right? We want to do this thing. Once the business says, yes, go do that. Well, that's when you're going to get deadlines. That's when you're going to have to be managing budgets. That's when, I don't want to say it doesn't become fun, because it still is fun, but it's going to get real, right? And at that point, what I find is a lot of times the engineers want to stay in this ideation space. Like, oh, there's this new thing, there's this new whatever. We have to deliver something in 2 weeks, and we're on the path to do that. Oh, this new LLM just came out. Like, we need to plug this in right now. Like, we don't have time for that. Please stop doing that, right? So I think that's where the manager hat kind of comes in, being able to guide to meet the objective of the business while not demotivating and curtailing the innovative spirit that the engineering teams typically have. And that's always a balance and a navigation that I think a lot of leaders have to go through. So.
Yeah, for sure. I can definitely relate to that. So Ryan, thank you very much for coming on the show. Great conversation. For the audience, if you like the episode, feel free to like the episode and subscribe to Tech Teams Today on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And Ryan, thanks again for coming on the show. Great episode.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.